Okay, so for this video, I want us to shift our focus onto Norman Bowker, who is a character in Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, and features in multiple of the many of the short stories that are in the collection. So when we're first introduced to Norman Bowker, he he features in the short story The Things They Carried. And page 4 is the first mention of him, and the thing that he carried is a diary. So this is one of the personal possessions apart from all the, arsenal, arms, and other provisions that the soldiers carried. So his sort of luxury item or personal item that he carries is a diary. So if we were just going to reflect on this object in relation to Norman's character, we could say maybe just from the fact that, it's a diary that's included, could suggest that, maybe he is a more reflective type of personality, maybe a little bit more sensitive than the other soldiers. Um, whereas, Rat Kiley is carrying a comic book, here we have Norman Bowker who's carrying a diary. So it does suggest something maybe a little bit more reflective or insightful about his character. Maybe he's a little bit more sensitive or introspective than some of the other men. And we learn early on that he is also the one who carries the thumb of a VC boy of 15 or 16. And this is a gift. This is on page 13. So Norman Bowker, otherwise a very gentle person, carried a thumb that had been presented to him as a gift by Mitchell Sanders. The thumb was dark brown, rubbery to the touch, and weighed 4 ounces at most. It had been cut from the VC corpse, a boy of 15 or 16. So this thumb of a young boy who has died, they carry it, or Bowker carries it with him. So this is sort of another interesting item that could reflect on Norman Bowker's character. As it says, he's otherwise a very gentle person, but here he is carrying this remnant of this boy's life, a thumb, almost like, a trophy of somebody he killed. Or maybe it's just a sort of reminder of death that he carries on his person. So it's an interesting sort of paradoxical characterization of Norman Bowker, who is both gentle and then carrying this body part from somebody, a young man who has died. So somewhat contradictory there, that somebody could be so sensitive and seemingly sort of caring, and then at the same time have this remnant of death on his body, carrying it with him. We also learn that Norman Bowker comes from a family where his father also was a soldier, and there are certain gender expectations placed on Norman Bowker because of his father's veteran status. So we can look on page 39. This is in the short story Spin. So on page 39, we have Norman Bowker described by Tim O'Brien, and then he says, Norman Bowker lying on his back one night watching the stars, then whispering to me, "I'll tell you something, O'Brien. If I could have one wish, anything, I'd wish for my dad to write me a letter and say it's okay if you don't win any medals. That's all my old man talks about, nothing else. How he can't wait to see my goddamn medals." So there's a certain amount of pressure, somewhat, fatherly peer pressure on Norman Bowker to fulfill this dream or goal that his father has for him. So in order to prove himself as a man, Norman Bowker feels, or he's been taught by his father, that you have to earn medals as a soldier. So you have to prove your courage and willingness to take risks with your life. So the desire for medals for his dad has the sort of pressure on his son to fulfill the duties and obligations of his manhood by winning medals in the war. And there is a kind of pressure that Norman Bowker feels, and he wishes that his dad didn't put all this pressure on him to gain medals, because he feels it is an impossible ideal to meet, and it would have a destructive effect on his self-esteem and self-worth if he did not gain medals, right? So if he didn't win any medals, he would somehow feel like less of a man, that he would disappoint his father, that he wouldn't have lived up to the gender expectations that are on him as a soldier. So we learn some of the pressures, how society, and in this case family, pressures exist around these men to fulfill some sort of gender obligations, the sense of duty, and live up to an ideal of the courageous soldier. Is a lot of pressure on these young men, and it turns out to be too much pressure. And we'll see Norman Bowker struggling in the aftermath of death, when he is faced with a moment of when Kiowa will fall on the field, and he is unable to save his fellow soldier. So the story that focuses most on Norman Bowker's character is the short story titled Speaking of Courage on page 155. Following that story, we also have discussion of Norman Bowker in the section called Notes on page 177. So these two chapters in the book sort of represent or describe Norman Bowker's transformation and the after effects of trauma on the mindset of a returning soldier. So Norman Bowker has, in Speaking of Courage, this takes place after the war was over. Norman Bowker returns to his hometown, and here he feels sort of out of place. So he is kind of unable to readjust, and he feels sort of stuck. And there's a couple of imagery, uses of imagery in the story that reinforce this idea of being stuck and sort of caught in a place where there is no moving forward. So for Norman Bowker, it seems the past still has a hold on who he is and how he experiences the world. So he can't fully overcome memories of the war, and he's almost repeating, continually stuck in these haunting memories of what went wrong. So we have Norman Bowker in this story driving around and around the lake in his hometown. So every night, for no particular reason, he has nowhere else to go. He just gets in his car and circles the lake. So he does loop after loop around the lake every night. So we have this image of repetition, right? So the loops, the constant looping over and over again, cycling over and over again. This is kind of a strong image that reflects Norman Bowker's memory, his mindset, because he cannot move on from the past. So he keeps going back over and over again to this traumatic event that occurred during the war, and he hasn't been able to fully process or move on from this moment. So the looping of the lake is a kind of metaphor or symbol for the way that his mind keeps returning to this past traumatic event. And the rest of the town seems to be sort of separated from him, or he separates himself from the rest of the town, or there seems to be some amount of disconnect between himself and others. And what happens is, he can't really fully verbalize or tell his story, and he gets stuck in this way as well. The town seems, or is characterized as very sort of unsympathetic to his experience, and everyone has seemed to move on, but he is still stuck in this endless loop between past and present. And we get some of his trauma goes back to this idea that he has somehow not lived up to an ideal of being the heroic soldier that he was sort of believed himself to be, or that he had pressure from his father and from society to be. So he repeatedly goes back to this idea that he's almost won the Silver Star, but he almost did, but not quite. So this seems to be a sort of sore point in his sense of gender identity. So he didn't get the medal for bravery, but he did get 7 other medals. But it seems as if these other medals don't quite hold the same amount of status or esteem as this one Silver Star medal for valor. And partially he feels, he wishes he had somebody to talk to. And it seems as if there is nobody in his town that is open to listening to his story. And he has no sense of release or outlet for all of these emotions that he would just like to sort of unload his memories onto somebody and have some sort of empathy or understanding for what he went through. But without that, it just causes a kind of, sadness, and the turmoil continues because he has no outlet for his emotions. So there is a silence between himself and his father, and he wishes his father would ask him or allow him to talk about the war experience. And he imagines what his father, or sort of wishes his father would have asked him to tell the story, but his father remains silent and just wants to watch baseball. So Norman Bowker, talks about what he would have wanted to say, and this story that's like a burden on his mind that he hasn't fully released and has no sense of closure. But it's this story that he keeps going back to, where he watches a fellow soldier sink down into this mud, and he is unable to rescue this other soldier, so he watches him drown in the mud. And this is the memory that haunts him, and he cannot fully sort of reconcile or forgive himself, and continually suffers from sort of post-traumatic stress related to his feelings of guilt and shame around not helping Kiowa in this situation.